So my research was entirely archival based. I mean, there were a few interviews I did, but my subject matter is someone who's not in living memory, right? So I mean, the interviews and such were, kind of on the side. So I mean, anyone who does a project based on archival research, it's a bit daunting at first, and there's no real proper way to learn how to research in an archive. You just have to throw yourself into it. So I'll talk a little bit about how the book began. I mean, the book began while I was in a PhD program in Harvard. It was essentially my dissertation, and I had the idea when I began my PhD program back in 2007, 2008, but really only around 2010 or so did I have an idea that I wanted to focus on Naoroji, and I started my dissertation research in India in 2011, and I did about 3 years of dissertation research, which perhaps in hindsight was a little too much. Most of my research was based in Delhi in terms of working with Dadabhai Naoroji's papers at the National Archives in India, of India over there. I also worked at Teen Murti, Maharashtra State Archives, and spent several months in Britain working at the National Archives of the UK and the British Library, and then took about a year to write it in the form of the dissertation. And because of the various vagaries of your career, when you're an early career academic, did not have much time to write it. In the first few years I had a job, and finally got around to writing most of it in, I think, 2018 or 2019, and it was finally published in 2020. So all in all, from start to finish, it was 10 years, which is not uncommon for an academic book that's published by an academic publisher. One hopes that the process gets quicker and more condensed in one second and third books. I'll have to see. So my research was entirely archival based. I mean, there were a few interviews I did, but my subject matter is someone who's not in living memory, right? So I mean, the interviews and such were, kind of on the side. I mean, anyone who does a project based on archival research, it's a bit daunting at first, and there's no real proper way to learn how to research in an archive. You just have to throw yourself into it. And so I remember the first time I went to the National Archives of India when I was an undergrad. I spent several weeks kind of treading water and seeing, what the processes are, who was in charge, how to request files, what the general rate of success was in actually getting a file, and it's a learning process. And, I think doing research anywhere in India, you really have to put in your time. Because, if you show the archivist that you're serious, answers to your question become less no, and more, we'll see what we can do. So I think building up trust in an archival situation is very important. And since I had basically 2 years to work in the National Archives, primarily in Delhi, I was able to build up that level of trust and good relations with archivists there that, they were able to, even let me go and get files by myself when they were busy. Which is something I would never be able to do in, say, the British Library. But they trust me to the ability that they knew I was not going to pilfer stuff or do anything to it. So I think you really have to build up a strong presence that you're serious about your research. You can't do what a lot of people do in archival facilities in, say, the United States or the UK, which is come to an archive, spend a few days or a week, and then go away. That doesn't work in India. You need 1 or 2 weeks just to understand how the archive and the facility works, and only then do you get a sense of how, say, a particular collection is organized, and only after several months, really, do you get a sense of what the layout of a particular collection looks like. So it really is learning by putting in time into the research process. Digital resources have been absolutely transformative, and I think they've been very good also for research involving India, and especially for Indians doing research, because prior to a lot of material being digitized, you had huge collections of material sitting in, say, Chicago or Harvard or Berkeley. That would be largely inaccessible for any scholar here, unless you had the resources to go out to London or the United States in order to do work. And I mean, obviously digitization is a problematic thing because it's been monetized. But there are certain resources that have been put out for free or for nominal amounts, like, say, what the Asiatic Society has done in Bombay, where they've digitized a lot of old newspapers. The National Archives of India has also digitized a few things, but it's very uneven. I mean, one of my pet peeves about the Nehru Memorial Museum and Library is, they don't allow you to photograph material. If you want to request, reproductions of material, you're given photocopies. And, I've written 1 or 2 letters to directors saying this is ridiculous and this needs to change. But there seems to be a certain reluctance on the part of a lot of archival facilities to not just digitize material, but also to democratize that digitization. Many archival facilities in India have digitized material, but we don't know where that digitized material has gone. It's not been made public. Oftentimes it just lies, in a godown and on a CD, which is relatively inaccessible. So, the digitization process has not been perfect in India. It's not perfect anywhere, but there's great potential to kind of democratize research by not just digitizing material, but making it publicly available as well. I will be very honest. I work best under deadlines and pressure. So I'm a bit of a procrastinator when it comes to writing. So for me, I literally had a fire under the chair in the sense that, I needed to produce a dissertation, by, in the span of like 9 or 10 months after I really started writing in earnest. And at the same time, I was applying for academic jobs. So, around maybe 9 months before I finished my dissertation, I realized, oh God, I need to take this thing seriously. And prior to that, I was doing archival research that wasn't necessarily, related to my book. And, in hindsight, maybe I should not have done that. But that, ability to focus because of a firm deadline really helped me finish the process. And actually, the dissertation manuscript I produced is, to a substantial degree, the same as the book that's been published. There are significant changes in particular chapters and additions and subtractions, but by and large, the structure is the same as the dissertation, and some of the chapters are not verbatim, but quite similar to the final product. So, a deadline is very helpful, and likewise, I faced a deadline in the tenure track process as an academic. A member of an academic institution in the US, and so there was pressure to finish the book manuscript, and having those deadlines were really important for me. In terms of the process of writing, again, I think one experiment. I hit upon a schedule where I'd kind of write in 2 shifts. I'd write in the morning until lunch. After I'd have lunch, I'd kind of go into a bit of a comatose state where I was not very productive. And then what worked for me is I would exercise, and this was in Harvard in the middle of winter. So there's not much you can really do for exercise aside from going into a gym. Otherwise, you'd be, frostbitten outside and stuff like that. So I'd exercise for quite a bit, and then I'd write until maybe like 10 o'clock at night and go home and collapse and whatever. And I do that day in, day out. And it's not a process I would recommend, but it got the job done. I think one of the last thing I'll say is that if you research in India, you develop a tolerance for noise and distractions, right? So, researching in an archival facility in India, not only did I have to face, archivists talking about, rising prices of onions in a very loud voice in the background, or various other researchers chatting. Occasionally, I'd have to face things like, say, hornets coming inside and, interfering with your ability to research. Once or twice, I passed a monkey in the archival facility. There were days when the electricity didn't work. Noise, commotion, God knows whatever else was going on. And I wrote a good chunk of, the final book manuscript in an apartment in Bombay where there was, again, lots of outside distractions and such. So you kind of develop an ability to kind of work amidst chaos, which I think is good, because I think Indian historians have a definite leg up over, say, a British historian who works in a relatively pristine, quiet, professional environment, and ditto for the Americans. That has definitely helped me, because I've now been able to research and write under, whatever circumstances. I remember researching some of my book while on a bus traveling, for conferences. And just coming to this conference yesterday, our flight got diverted, which was fine for me because I just had a book, and, in spite of passengers yelling and screaming at airline stewards and such over, flight delays, I just sat in a corner and just read. And so I think that ability is something that, really helps You kind of build a kind of cocoon around you, and regardless of what is going on, whether it's political chaos or mela or monkeys or what have you, you can do your own thing.